This is probably the most conflicted review that I've ever done on this channel. This is the Pietro hand grinder. Now this is a 58mm flat burr coffee grinder. That's very important. We're going to talk about that more in just a minute. They are manufactured by Fiorenzado in Italy, which is a grinder manufacturer. They do both home and commercial coffee grinders, and this is kind of their first foray into the manual grinder world. These grinders are made of aluminum with, as I said, 58mm flat burrs with a DLC coating. That's like a carbon coating. They come in two burr configurations. So this one is, they call it the bimodal burr, which is kind of an all-around espresso or filter burr. And this one they call the M-modal Pro Burr Set, which is really designed more for filter coffee. Now, before we get too far into this, I do want to give a disclaimer off the top. I received both of these grinders from my partners at Espresso Parts. Now, Espresso Parts is a company based out of the US, and they distribute all kinds of coffee and espresso equipment, both for home and commercial. And I love my partners at Espresso Parts. In fact, I couldn't do this channel without them. But as always, and I say this in every video, my responsibility is to you guys, and I'm always gonna speak to you honestly about the products that I'm reviewing on my channel. Now, sometimes I'm fortunate enough to just be able to use a product, love it, and just say, hey guys, I love this product, here's why, here's some things you may wanna consider. And other times, my experience is a lot more, let's say, mixed about a product. So I think you'll see from this video that I have absolutely no problem speaking transparently about a product, even if I get it from one of my partners. And my thoughts here are totally my own. Espresso Parts hasn't seen this video, and I actually have never even talked to the team in Italy from Fiorenzado. Okay, fair enough? Now, before we talk about whether or not this is a good grinder or whether it's worth the amount of money that it costs, which is a lot, we need to talk about why this grinder is a big deal at all. Almost every hand grinder on the market for coffee uses what's called a conical burr set. It's like a cone-shaped burr set, and these grinders use what's called a flat burr set. Now, a conical burr is a lot closer to what you would see in like a pepper mill, and as soon as you see these two types of burrs side by side, it's immediately apparent that they're very different. Now, conical burrs are a lot better suited to hand grinders for several reasons. They're cheaper, they work better at low RPM, so if you're turning it by hand, you're going slower than it would be with a motor. They don't generate as much heat, and just the design of them allows the coffee to kind of fall through the burr set by gravity a little bit easier than a flat burr. Flat burrs generally tend to operate better at high RPMs. They're very sensitive to like alignment, and you need some kind of mechanism to get the coffee grounds kind of falling down into a dosing cup from kind of the burr mechanism. Now, I heard about these grinders a long time before I ever saw one. Even in a picture, I'd heard that Fiorenzado was working on this groundbreaking new hand grinder. It was going to make big waves, and these have certainly done that. And then when I saw one in person, there was no denying, like, that is a nice looking hand grinder. The thing looks beautiful. It's flat burr configuration. Like, I can't wait to try this. And when I opened it, I was like, yes, this is a beautiful piece of equipment. You know, I had scoped out the Pietro website, and it uses words like the vertical revolution, the future of grinding. And I'm like, this is amazing that this product is here. And then I used it, and my experience was kind of brutal. Then I actually made a cup of coffee with it, and the coffee was absolutely incredible. So it left me feeling like really mixed on my first impressions. On one hand, you have this beautiful hand grinder that is a Red Dot Design Award winner that kind of sucks to use in a lot of ways, but makes really good tasting coffee. So how do you make an assessment of if this is a good grinder or not? Now, before I get into my kind of myriad of complaints about these grinders, I do want to talk about the Burr Sets in a little bit more detail, because kind of understanding the difference is important. This one, the all-around, they call it the bimodal burr set, is what's called a bimodal burr set. Now, you can go way deep down the rabbit hole. I'm not going to do that here, but suffice to say, it creates what's called more fines in your coffee grounds, which is more little tiny particles, in addition to big, what they call boulders. So it's kind of a bit of a mix. All grinders kind of tend to do this to a degree, but this grinder has those kind of two groupings groupings in very specific places to make for both good espresso and good filter coffee. It is a little bit cheaper, and this grinder, Fiorenzato says, can do everything from like ibrick, which is like Turkish coffee, super fine, all the way to filter coffee and even coarser, you know, if you do a couple things. This one, on the other hand, uses their M-modal Pro Brew set, and it uses what's called a unimodal distribution. So tries to almost eliminate all of those fines altogether and kind of concentrate all of the grounds in that kind of bolder range. When it comes to the Pro Brew burrs, Fiorenzato doesn't really recommend it for espresso, but I tried it. You can absolutely do espresso with this. I hands down preferred the espresso out of this one. It was easier to dial in. This one was super hard, super high clarity, not a lot of body, you know, maybe better suited to a turbo style espresso. This one was just like perfect body, clarity, sweetness. It was excellent. Now, before I start complaining about this grinder, I do want to give some credit to Fiorenzato. Nobody has really done this kind of thing before, created a grinder in this configuration. So for there to be a couple bumps in the execution, I wasn't really surprised by that because they're doing something totally new. So why don't we just get into my laundry list of complaints about this grinder? Number one, it is absolutely huge. The thing weighs like 3.5 pounds. It's not really a portable hand grinder, although you would kind of think that it is. It almost seems like it's more designed for you to leave at home rather than to take with you. When you compare it against Time More C3, you can see the Pietro absolutely dwarfs the C3. It's a massive grinder. Also, the top of the grinder, it's almost ridiculously hard to get off. You really, like, there's not a lot of a ledge for you to get your nails under, and it's almost kind of painful to get the lid off the grinder. Now, this one is a little better, so that may vary unit to unit, but I was really surprised because the bottom is actually super easy to take off. It's magnetic, feels very nice, slips on and off, and then you have the top, which is just like, every time you want to get the top off, you feel like you're about to pull your fingernails off. I tried to use a tool to get it off and I ended up chipping the paint a little bit. So even before you start grinding with it, it just feels like it's not totally polished. Now, when you start grinding with it, that's another story entirely. You know, you flip out the handle, that's kind of cool, feels very satisfying. But then you start using it, you can really only grab it with this part of your hand. The handle doesn't extend beyond that, so you're really grinding it with like your finger, one finger and thumb, and you're knocking your knuckles on whatever surface you're grinding on because the clearance under here is so low. You almost have to hold it on the edge. This is how I've come to use it, the edge of a surface, and then you're not really needing to worry about clearance, but like that's not even a conversation that you would be having with any other hand grinder. Also, if you don't hold it right, the clearances of this arm swinging around, they can knock your knuckles or your thumb, which that can be like super painful. So you have to kind of keep your fingers clear as you're spinning this around, and you have to use it on the edge. I'll just say there's a knack of using it where you're not going to hurt yourself that kind of pigeonholes you into a certain way of using it. If you do try and hold it up to kind of do a different way of holding the grinder, the magnets are loose enough on the bottom that just even by holding it, the grind cup can actually fall off. Now, this happened to me. I dumped a whole load of very nice Gesha beans on the floor because I was trying to hold it a different way to make it a little bit more comfortable. Definitely not recommended. You really do want to have it on a table, holding it like this on the edge. There's not really another good way to use it. And even when you're doing that, this top is not comfortable at all in your hand. It kind of feels like it's digging into the palm of your hand. It doesn't feel like a natural thing that you want to be holding on to. So overall, you know, they say unique ergonomics. I would say the ergonomics are actually kind of bad when you're actually using it, just because of the clearances and the shape of it and the size of it. A couple other things, you know, taking it apart is super easy, but then if you release this button and it spins around and then you just try and reassemble it, if it's not lined up perfectly, you can actually jam it. I did that one of the first times I tried reassembling it. You really need to make sure that the feeding funnel is kind of lined up and the button is depressed before you go to try and put it back together. Also, this dosing cup. you know, the grinder is big, and as a result, the dosing cup is really big as well. And it's actually pretty difficult to dose the coffee grounds into a small filter without creating a big mess because the dosing cup is so wide. You can try doing it on an angle, which seems to help a little bit, but then there are these giant ridges in the dosing cup where coffee can kind of get stuck on there and it becomes like a runner, and then all of a sudden you'll have a bunch of coffee come out on this little ridge here and creates a mess again, and dosing it into a portafilter is difficult as well. Now, I actually want to show you what this is like to actually grind coffee with this. So I'm going to take the lid off again, and I have a set of pretty light roast. I'm just going to pour them in. I'm going to put the cap back on. Now this is set for obviously filter coffee. This is the Pro Brew Set, and I'm just going to start grinding. And you can see the grinder will like bind up and twist around, which really creates a bit of a rocky grinding experience. You almost have to stand in a way where you can kind of get around it. I'll often do it on a corner for this reason, so I can actually like stand behind it, brace myself a little better. But if you're grinding super light roasts, it's gonna bind up and kind of rock, and it's just not quite as seamless as other conical hand grinders. Now, the darker you go, like medium to dark roast, you know, this is really only a problem with super light roasts. I used one coffee, it was like trying to grind rocks in this thing. And so I think that's just a factor of the different burr set, the different style of grinder. And it just, you know, every video you look on, you see the Pietro like rocking away, the handle binding up as people are using it. It's just part of the experience of using this grinder. So it all kind of adds up into this kind of poor ergonomic experience. Now, Fiorenzato has released a stand to help with that, as well as a dosing funnel to kind of help with the dosing issue. But doesn't that kind of say something that they release this grinder and then almost right away they release these other accessories to kind of mitigate the poor experience of using it? Not something I would really expect from a Red Dot award-winning product. But then you make a coffee with it and the results are totally dreamy. I made my wife Sarah an espresso with the all-around Burr Set, and like first try, I made an espresso and it was incredible. I had it on setting 2. I served it to my wife and she said that is a perfect cup of coffee. Filter cups are very good as well. It is like a dreamy, high quality, incredible cup of espresso or filter coffee. And then you get on this one, the Pro Brew Set. And when you're making filter coffee with this, like, I'm not exaggerating here, it is some of the cleanest coffee that I've ever tasted. These burrs were designed in partnership with Lance Hedrick, obviously the Burr Man, legendary YouTuber as well. And the cups really do reflect that. Like, it tastes so good. It's so clear. There's so much separation of flavor. You could almost call it a clinical taste. You know, it might actually be too smooth and too clear for you. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on the type of flavor that you're looking for. Usually with flat burr, unimodal, you would say like high clarity, low body. I would say there was some body to it, very like silky, like smooth, syrupy almost, but not too thick. Just this kind of nice texture to it. So that left me in this very funny position. On one hand, I don't really like the experience of using the grinder, but on the other hand, I find myself just continuing to use it because the coffee is so good. So I think to ask, is this a good grinder? It really almost depends on what you value. I kind of talk about these grinders like a sports car. It's high performance, it looks fantastic, but you can't even put a set of groceries in it. There's no trunk. It's not that comfortable to sit in. It's a bumpy ride. And I think what Fiorenzato has done is they've kind of made a burr first design that looks great and everything else kind of comes secondary. So they kind of are saying, this is what you get, you're gonna pay for it, and all that other stuff, we don't really care. It's got its quirks, take it or leave it. And I think some people you see online, they love this grinder for that reason. It's unique, it looks fantastic, the cup quality is excellent, and other people, they kind of hate it because it's a pain to use. If you're looking for a daily driver that's convenient, portable, you can take anywhere, I don't know that this is it. This is not the minivan of coffee grinders. If you are looking for a sports car, high performance, you're willing to put up with a little bit of grief in the daily use, this is a great option if the $450 to $475 US budget doesn't really freak you out. It's an expensive grinder with an incredible cup quality and in some ways kind of a brutal use and when it comes to daily use and portability. Now, I want to hear what you think about these grinders, because to be honest, I'm still kind of mixed about it. In some ways, I kind of hate using it, but I still love the cups. Where does that weigh out for you? I would love to know. Do you think it deserves a Red Dot Design Award? Because it looks great, but you know, with those other hitches, I'm not really sure. Would you take cup quality over convenience? Do you think the price tag is over the top, or do you think it's reasonable? This is a very interesting grinder because I think depending on where you're coming from, this is either going to be great or you're absolutely going to think it's terrible. So I would love to know what you think about this grinder, and in the meantime, happy brewing.